Welcome to Beyond the X, a podcast for ambitious marketers navigating transformation of their organizations and of themselves. Today, we're joined by Anna Bateson. Anna is one of the rare 4% of chief executive officers who began her career as a marketer, advancing from individual contributor all the way to CMO to now the CEO of a global organization. In many ways, she's a near unicorn, a marketing leader who didn't just master the craft of marketing, but made the leap to running an entire organization. In this conversation, we unpack what really changes as you move from marketer to marketing leader all the way to CEO. And spoiler alert, it's not just about the skills. Anna speaks candidly about the emotional shock of stepping into the CEO role, the constant visibility and energy it demands, and the performative pressure it requires, and also why good work doesn't always speak for itself, especially as you rise up the ladder. We explored the uncomfortable shift from being liked to being effective, from being the smartest person in the room to being the best at driving horizontal influence, and from managing output to carrying the full emotional weight of an entire organization. So if you're ambitious about your career, whether that's to advance to CMO or eventually run a whole company on your own, this episode is going to challenge how you think about leadership, visibility, and the identity shifts required to grow to the next level. Let's dive in. So very few people ever cross the threshold from being a CMO to a CEO. And if they're lucky to do it, I think when they get there, there's a stark recognition that what has gotten you here won't necessarily get you to the next level, that everything you've learned has to be rethought and reanalyzed. And what I want to talk about today is this journey from becoming a marketer, going from being a marketer to being a marketing leader, all the way from being a marketing leader to being a CEO. And I want to go back in time to that moment when you first became a CEO. Again, something that, according to our research, only 4% of CEOs ever have a marketing background. Was there a moment when you first recognized that, again, what got you here was no longer going to make you successful as a CEO?
I don't know if there's a moment. I think there's a sort of protracted building sense, kind of over time that things are very different.
Yes.
I think the first experience of that is just the sense of how incredibly performative the role is, and therefore there's no downtime.
Yes.
So from the moment that you arrive to the moment that you leave and even beyond in a day, you are on show, or you feel at the beginning very much like you're performing.
Yes.
Everyone's looking at you. Everyone has expectations. There's nowhere to hide, and there's no sense of I'll just coast in this meeting, or I'll take a back seat, or any of those kind of things. So the first realization is this sense of how much energy it takes and how much you feel that you are in a constant state of performance. By the way, I don't think any of this is particular to the transition from being a marketing leader to being a CEO. I suspect everybody feels that way. But genuinely, the idea of just being unable to relax or kind of withdraw or not be completely focused was the first thing that felt completely different. And it doesn't last, forever, but it definitely is the sensation of the first 6 months to a year, I think.
It's interesting because a lot of CEOs believe there's some personality tests that you can take. And one of the questions you get asked that tends to show up quite frequently in people who are in leadership positions is, do you believe you would be a good actor? And a lot of CEOs tend to say yes. And I think that gets at this point that there is this performative aspect of the job. How did you... It sounds like while it's there in all leadership positions, it takes on a new flavor and shape when you take on the role of CEO.
Yes.
So how did you cope with that, and how did you approach it?
So I think the first thing is perhaps it shouldn't be a surprise, but inevitably it is. And I do think that no one really prepares you for kind of stepping up into those moments. at the same time, there's probably more preparation that one could do or that one could be kind of subject to.
Yes.
So no one really prepares you. So the first thing is just coming to terms with it as a state. The second thing is having the right advice and support around you. And I think that the obvious expression of that is having a coach of some sort. But really what that is having somebody who is your mentor, your guide, your dedicated person in a way who you can discuss these things with.
Yes.
And I definitely understood how powerful that could be during that period. I hadn't really totally understood the role of that kind of relationship, and then suddenly you really do. Everybody says to you that that leadership is lonely. And I think that is sort of what they're trying to prepare you for, which is you are, in some ways it's not lonely, which is you're never really alone. You know, it's actually you're constantly surrounded by people. And in a way, thinking of it as lonely is a little bit reductive in a sense, because actually that sense of performance is very, very much about managing your energy and managing your resilience, your resources.
Yes.
The loneliness is more that you don't necessarily have that kind of obvious support structure around you.
Yes.
And so I think it is being thoughtful about where you get that kind of support, because it isn't just there naturally. Because by definition, you are quite, you're not surrounded by a peer group of people who are there to be your support kind of team.
I find that quote of "it's only at the top" to be one of the most misunderstood quotes. I think a lot of people interpret it as you think you're sort of above everyone else, but that's actually not what it's all about. I think it is about the fact that you have a responsibility for everything and everyone, and yet every buck stops with you, and you have a responsibility to also shield the team from a lot of the stuff as much as possible. And no one else quite bears the same burden. It's not about hierarchy at all.
No.
It is about actually the emotional toll that you pay.
Yes, and I think that's probably the insight, which is that first, I think, period of the job is all about the emotional shock.
Yeah.
It's less about the professional, the functional, piece of it. It's more about that emotional transition and the understanding of what's going to be needed from you and where it is that you're really being asked to add value and contribute.
Yes.
And that perhaps is the sort of the most surprising piece of it, which you go in thinking it's going to be an intellectual or a functional test.
Because you got there through your intellectual means.
And exactly. And I think that is probably an analogy there with how you transition from being a marketer to being a leader, because it's the same thing, which is you move from being someone who is functionally adept and capable and delivering and really a master of their profession or their craft, to being something that is much more it's much more kind of three-dimensional in its requirements, which is you're required to be a leader of people. You're required to care about those people, to shield them, protect them, motivate them, direct them. But also, when you first become a leader in that capacity, you also have to understand your relationship with your peer group. And so that sort of, I'm now part of a leadership team, and therefore my horizontal relationships are as important as my relationships with my team, beneath me and above me. And that's quite a big transition, understanding where you should be committing your time, your energy, your locus, in a sense. And I think it's the same sort of step, that you have to make then when you kind of become the CEO or the leader of that kind of team that you were previously part of.
You mentioned earlier that no one prepared you for this journey, or most of us are sort of unprepared when we step up to it, even though in retrospect there's more we can do to prepare. When did this become your ambition?
I'm not convinced that it was an obvious ambition of mine or a clearly articulated one. I stumbled into it in a sense that I went to The Guardian. I was essentially the CMO there. I mean, it was I had broader responsibilities, which is interesting in itself because I was the chief customer officer, so I was responsible for revenue as well as marketing, which is an interesting piece of where we may get to about kind of, skills and experiences. And I then became involved in an internal process to succeed as the next CEO. And I wanted to participate in that process, but I hadn't gone into my job originally with an idea that was where the end point was going to be. So in a sense, it happened to me, and I then became a participant in it. And I wasn't successful in that process, and that taught me a lot. And it was in the reflection around how I felt about not being successful and not having got the job that I realized that was something that I wanted. And it was something that I thought I could be good at, and that I had a sort of I had value to add. I had a right to have a kind of ambition around. So it was slightly by default rather than by active identification that it was something I wanted to do.
I think many people listening to this probably don't wake up in the morning and have that ambition to go from being, a marketer to a marketing leader to a CEO. I think they see the top of that hill as becoming a CMO. What did you experience in your interim role that made you feel like, actually, I think I can be good at this next step?
The first thing you experience is sort of humility, all the things that you didn't know that you get a new kind of found respect for. I think I learned that no one is good at everything. So therefore, this idea as and I think this might be quite a female trait, this idea that you have to be really good at everything in order to be worthy of the job. No one's good at everything. So it's a sense of understanding what it is that you are good at and that you can contribute, and is that relevant and appropriate to the task in hand? And how do you then make sure that you are surrounded by the right team of people who can compensate for the areas that you're less experienced in or that you're less strong in? So the first piece is the humility that this is a different job from the one that you thought it was. Secondly is the understanding that actually you are worthy and capable of it, because you don't have to be ticking every box in order to be able to succeed. And thirdly, that sense of you genuinely have something to contribute. You have something that would make a difference, and then a frustration that you didn't get the opportunity to do it. So that sort of piques your ambition and your interest.
What was the skill when you first stepped into the job that you felt most insecure about you not having, that you had to depend on your team on? And how did you eventually either work on it or accept it, or what did you do about that?
My insecurities and anxieties were around could I make the tough decisions? Was I going to be perceived as too soft or cerebral, too intellectual, too unable to actually make a difference when it came to operational delivery and getting things done and moving the organization in the direction that you want to move. You want it to move into. That was my area of anxiety. Could you be authentically tough enough to get things done while at the same time sort of being true to the things that you feel are and that where you're adding value?
It's because here we get into, I think, a mental state where as you get higher up in an organization or in your career, the more tough decisions you make, the more you recognize, at least the more I've recognized, that being liked by everyone is no longer possible. And again, I don't know if this is a female trait, but I think it is such a human instinct to want to be liked by those around you.
I don't know if it is a female trait. Interestingly, I know why. I've wondered the same thing.
Yes.
I mean, we're definitely kind of there. I mean, maybe not everybody, but I am definitely quite hardwired to be a pleaser.
Yes.
I want to please people.
Me too.
And I think actually in certainly in marketing, you are rewarded for being effectively in service of others, in pleasing others. It doesn't mean that you're always doing what others tell you to do or what others want, but there is a sense of delivering what your stakeholders, what those around you are seeking or need, or and that is a big thing that you have to kind of let go of. There is no merit in trying to be liked, and trying to be popular and trying to be the person that everybody thinks, is their friend or their sort of, or even their kind of, their sort of hero in a sense, where there is a little bit of that when you're kind of lower down. And yes, letting go of that, letting go of the desire to be liked is very liberating.
Very easy to say.
Yes.
Really difficult to do.
Very.
How did you actually get to a place where you could start letting go of some of that and embrace that tough decisions made for the good of the company might not make you liked in the short term, but they were nonetheless the right decisions?
I don't think you do that, as in, I don't think you let go actively. You let go by default, having made the decisions and then sort of had suffered, suffered the experience of them.
And realize you're still standing afterwards.
Exactly. I think, and that comes back to the resilient piece, which is, and all of these cliches, which turns out they have a reason for existing. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's true. So you survive those experiences. You survive, less than ideal feedback, terrible meetings, terrible sort of kind of responses to what you've done. You emerge and you think, well, I'm stronger now. I'm less affected by it. I can carry on.
Having this vantage point now, what do you think you most misunderstood about the job when you were a CMO inside an organization?
I didn't understand, I suppose, the breadth of sort of responsibility. So probably if I think about my relationships with, my bosses, and that sense of why you weren't always front of mind or why your area wasn't the thing that was being given the most attention, why there's always what seems to be so sort of, relentless, the questioning about your budget, the questioning about the value that you're adding, the inevitable interference in your work because everybody has an opinion, and everybody thinks that they have some ownership of the brand, and of course they do. That's one of the things that you just have to come to terms with as a marketeer. Everybody does have a right to have a say about the brand, but I think I didn't understand how you're not always the center of attention, and at the same time there's a legitimacy to people, having an interest and a point of view about what you're doing, because it is so visible. And it often is about kind of, the deployment of considerable amounts of resources against outcomes. And there is a reason why you should be justifying the return on the investment you're making. That's not just an irritant. That's a legitimate expectation.
How would you, if you could go back to the CMO roles that you had, knowing now what it's like to be the CEO? Sometimes I think of my former bosses and I think, gosh, what a pain.
I know.
I must have been. And if I could go back, I would certainly have a lot more empathy, having been at times a very difficult direct report. But if you could go back and do that job again now, some of the CMO jobs you had again now, knowing what you know about the CEO role, are there specific things you would want to do differently?
I hope I would be more understanding about that sense of the sharing of work, the gathering of feedback. It isn't a sort of attack or an sort of excessive irritant. There's almost always legitimacy to it, and actually, if you can handle it in the right way, it often, not always, but it often makes work better and pushes you to think about things that you hadn't thought about before.
And actually opens doors, I find.
Yes. Yes, I agree with that. But sometimes when you're very busy, when you're trying to get things done, when you're trying to ship things as a marketeer, when you've been so involved in a process, and then you hit a a barrier or a piece of feedback or a questioning, it can seem like such an unnecessary roadblock when you're determined to kind of get something out or kind of deliver something. And I look at it the other way. I think you have to embrace that. You have to embrace that process, and you have to make that process work for you. And it is not about circumventing the process. It is about understanding how that can be as informed and enhancing as possible. I think connected to that then is the realization that the superpowers that you have as a marketeer are always going to be that genuine audience centrality. And if I think about the thing that makes a marketeer most appropriate for modern day leadership and sort of CEO roles, I think it comes back to that you should be rooted fundamentally in an audience kind of in an audience obsession and an audience knowledge perspective. And of course, one aspect of that is data, which is so significant and important. And again, if you can have that comfort with data, that sort of knowledge around data, I think that's an incredible skill to have in the current day. But it's not just data. It's coupled with that genuine curiosity and understanding about audience behaviours and how audience behaviours are changing and evolving and how that's relevant. And if you can couple that with deep understanding and articulation and appreciation of the brand or the product and how those things intersect, that I think is very powerful. I think sort of if you go back to what makes great marketeers effective now, I think it is the utilization and the understanding that that is a superpower and the utilization and application of it. If you are genuinely the person and the team that understands and owns that audience insight, and that's partly about the data piece, and it's partly about the as I say, the behaviors and the qualitative understanding, that I think is incredibly compelling. And then if you get into a debate about the efficacy of work or the kind of how you're kind of structuring your budget, that then becomes the foundation of the conversation, and you take it out of the subjective into the sort of much more kind of sort of kind of substantive.
But both of these things highlight is what I think of as this empathy gap.
Yeah.
Right. Both between management teams and leadership teams, as well as between marketeers and the very audiences they're meant to be serving and helping. To your first point, a post that I put on my monitor at home about 5 years ago, and I still have it up. I try to incept behaviors I want to change by putting little Post-its with tiny reminders. And one of them that I've had up for the longest time says generous interpretations. And it is about trying to manage my own reaction when someone comes in asking for something that I assume is sort of malintentioned. But actually, oftentimes when you dig, you find that, no, there is a legitimate reason for this thing. And I've been trying to override that reaction because the truth I find is more often than not closer to the generous interpretation sense.
I love that. It's very powerful. I think it's coupled with another piece, which is the more that you can understand people's motivations and people's personalities and what gives them energy and what doesn't within the kind of professional context, then I think the better able you are. And if you couple that with a sort of principle, which is I should try and be generous about this, I think that takes you to a very kind of powerful place. Sort of the channeling of curiosity and empathy about people is a very important part of leadership. And all of that, which seemed sort of faintly kind of bullshitty when we were exposed to it at Google, the endless kind of insights and sort of psychological profiling of yourself and then the people that you were working with. I'm a huge kind of fan of it and proponent of it, because there's nothing more helpful than, well, first of all, I think your own self-knowledge is the starting point of all of this. And it's incredible how far you can progress in your life and your career without a great deal of self-knowledge if you haven't actively reflected or worked on it. All of these things can be so sort of cringy when you sort of talk about them, but actually I think it's really powerful.
Yes.
And the same as when you're coming to understand the people that you work with or the people that work for you. If you're failing to instinctively connect with them or understand where they come from, that's your problem, not theirs. And you have to actively work to understand what it is that motivates them and how they communicate with you, and where the potential kind of misunderstandings or kind of, the failures to really kind of intuit what one another are trying to do. That's a failure to have invested in understanding others. And I think then if you then take on top of that the thing that you can actually actively practice, which is, I choose to think that you are well-intentioned in this, and therefore it's up to me to understand why you're kind of asking for it, and then we'll interrogate it.
Yes.
That is it's a much better way of working than to just believe that in some way this is, not coming from a good place.
Yes. Although the thing that I find very difficult about this is when we hire people. So when you hire a CMO or someone for your leadership team, I think historically what we do is we interview for functional competence, right? We ask them about the times they've, led a big brand or driven transformational growth or all of that. But actually the older I get, the more I recognize so much about leadership is exactly about what you described. The soft things that no one teaches you, that I found no other way to learn other from tons of self-reflection and a lot of failure in the process, and trying to be very honest about that failure. So my question to you is, when you are hiring someone to lead parts of your function, knowing that, what do you look for, and how do you hire for it?
First of all, I think you can learn lots of these things, interestingly. I don't think it is just, I think there is a huge part of experience teaches you, but I also think you can learn more about yourself and about others. And I think you can embrace the data and the body of work and the science now that's around it. And I think that is one of the things that I've realized has genuinely materially kind of changed in the last 15 years. That 15 years ago, it might have been slightly superficial and kind of, corporate speak and legitimately kind of accused of being bullshit. Now I think that the depth of science and work and data around it is very robust and real. So how do you hire for it? Well, I think you can hire you can definitely hire through the perspective of cultural fit, which is a euphemistic way of saying, will this person thrive within our organization, given what we know about the organization? And I think we at senior levels, we always do psychological profiling as part of the process.
Which psychological profile do you use? Hogan.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's actually very, it's often very insightful. Doesn't necessarily tell you something you didn't know, but it confirms things that you might want to have confirmed. And it gives you sort of insights into a person that you might not necessarily pick up even in a very kind of rigorous and robust process.
And do you share the results of those tests with the entire leadership team?
That's a very good question. We definitely share it with the candidates. I think it's then up to them whether or not they share it with the leadership team. So less about understanding yourself and more about understanding the team and the dynamics between the team and people's different styles.
When someone is trying to make the transition from being a marketer to a marketing leader, how do you think they can start to, because again, at that point, when you're an individual contributor, maybe leading a small team, it is all about the functional output that you produce. That is what you are rewarded for. And then if you're gunning for that, how do you start to build up or demonstrate your capacity for some of these really important softer type skills to be recognized as seen as someone who could lead a group of people?
So I think part of it is about doing.
Yes.
And which is why, I mean, when we were at Google, there was always that sort of sense of restlessness about give me people to manage, and that sense of, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because people's idea of progress is often very connected to exactly that.
Yes.
Do I have people to manage?
Yes.
How big is my budget? How big is my sort of sphere of influence and team? And some of that is probably sort of misguided, which is there's a sense of bigger means better. But some of it, I think, is very rational, which is you can only really learn about being a leader and a manager, but also crucially, I suppose, the difference between being a manager and being a leader by doing, by practicing. I think then there is this, I think that actually you should then be accepting that in addition to doing, and as you kind of do, you should be actively saying, how can I learn more about myself? How can I learn more about my style? How can I learn more about my impact on others? How curious can you be about feedback, and then not just sort of taking feedback, but actually thinking about what you do with that feedback? I think there is something very powerful about that sort of loop and cycle of eliciting feedback, reflecting about what that really says. Some of it's uncomfortable always, and some of it's really insightful and kind of eye-opening. And then what do I do about it? As in how do you begin to actually put that into practice, and how do you actively try and experiment with things that make a difference to what you were doing before based on what you've learned?
Yes. Well, you brought up feedback and sort of advice, support, coaching a couple of times.
Yes.
And what I'm curious about is a lot of people will give you feedback, right? And I think
yes, whether you want it or not.
Yes, whether you want it or not, you're going to get plenty of feedback, solicited and not. How do you determine for yourself which feedback you're going to let in and internalize and do something about, and which feedback you're going to sort of have bounce back?
I think you have to sit with things, don't you? I think you have to start from the position of genuinely being open to feedback. And I think that's an easy thing to say, but I also think you have to see the merit in it. So you have to go into it with a genuinely open mind. I think if you don't go into it with an open mind, then obviously you're fundamentally probably going to reject it all. So I think if you can go into it with a genuine open mind, and you can sit with the feedback, assuming that it's been that it's a process that has been done with a legitimacy and a skill, that it's not blunt or thoughtless. I think it has to be a thoughtful process. And then I think there are some things that certainly I find you immediately reject, and you have to come back to those things, and you have to sit with them in a way. And sometimes it's the things that you immediately reject that are then become the most interesting, or they open kind of, apertures within your sort of self-understanding.
Yes, that's certainly my experience.
Yes.
The things that I have the strongest visceral reaction to, I often the ones that hit a nerve that I force myself to continue pressing. It's hard.
It is hard.
But this is, I find, where actually some of the biggest behavior changes come from.
I totally agree. And so I think it's about it is about being thoughtful about the whole process in the round. I think it is about being ready for it. And I think it is about being willing to view it as a reasonably long-term arc, which is you'll have an immediate reaction. There are lots of things that you could cast aside. You're quite right. And there are some things that potentially you do go, okay, I accept it. But actually, in the overall scheme of my kind of, of things, this is not something that I'm going to overly rotate on. And then I think there are other things that just, they play in the back of your mind, and you have to acknowledge that there's some truth in it. And you then bring it forward in a way, and those are then the things that probably you should try and work on. So I suppose there's this question of how do you apply feedback? So the first is how do you accept it, and then it's how do you apply it, and that's probably something where you could legitimately want help and support.
One of the things you mentioned again is that sort of audience obsession and that curiosity about the audience you're serving. What I find is, again, there's an empathy gap there. We are often not the customers. We are reaching out. We make a lot of assumptions. So what do you find is, like, what do you recommend, or what do you look for in a marketing leader that demonstrates to you that they are truly audience obsessed?
I think the first thing is understanding both the power and perhaps the boundaries of data. So I don't think you would hire or I don't think you would want to hire a CMO who didn't have the foundation of the way that they worked or the way that they thought, or that data piece. But data, I think, can blind you about that next level of the reality of humans and humanity, and that in the end, your audience are people, and they're humans with emotions and irrationalities and habits and all of these things. And to only sort of see data points, I mean, again, to sort of obvious kind of, it's a sort of cliche, but to only see data points is to forget about the humanity and the slight chaos of actually people, or indeed the fact that, almost everybody does not wake up worrying about your brand, on a daily basis, and the sort of the humility of understanding the place that you play within, people's busy, lives. And then I think it is about the actual kind of living the curiosity. Are people paying attention? Are people kind of, traveling on public transport? Are people going to places that break them out of their... Everybody inevitably lives in some sort of bubble. And are you actively trying to step out of that bubble? And that could be by personal kind of, endeavor. It can be by what you wish to consume. It's by what you expose yourself to. It's how you spend time with people. But the conscious breaking out of your own habit and sort of sets of behaviours and the insulation that you inevitably have in your day-to-day life in order to understand what's actually happening and what people other than yourself are experiencing and doing.
There's a strong tendency to dehumanize at scale, I think.
Because it's easy. It's easy and it's deceptive. You think you are, you're awash with the richness of data, and it's seductive and very kind of powerful in so many ways. But you also have to recognize it dehumanizes. I felt that very strongly at Google, where we didn't even realize it that the more times you quoted the numbers with endless zeros on the end of how big the audience was, or hours of kind of video that was being uploaded per second, you didn't realize how dehumanizing those big numbers were, because big numbers are by definition an aggregate of lots of individuals, but you lose the individuality within it. And of course you can't know everybody, particularly when you're actually kind of involved in very mass market products, but you can remember that everybody is an individual in the end.
What do you do to stay connected to that truth? Because again, the higher up you go, the more it feels like people want, the traditional ways that historically marketing has done that, whether it, let's call it consumer research, gets siloed into a team that reports up the findings through data. Yeah. But if you want to continue to have, and it sounds like you're saying it is important that you keep some meaningful direct connection to the customer as an individual, how do you maintain that, both in your CMO roles and now as CEO?
I think it's both, you can do lots of things that might feel artificial, but that actually I think are always will, you can deliberately go and visit customers or get out of your office and go and sort of, travel the country or travel kind of the world, or deliberately aim to expose yourself to different cultures or experiences outside of the ones that you kind of live in day to day. But I also think it's how curious can you be around everything that you choose to read, expose yourself to, watch, seek out, and also just paying attention. I think I've always been in a tiny way slightly obsessed about the tube, and the fact that if you live in London and you work in London and you take the tube, what that exposes you on the bus or what that exposes you on a daily basis if you pay attention. If you look around, if you sort of see what people are wearing, what are people looking at, how are people behaving, how do people kind of react to different situations. and you're not just plugged in the whole time or kind of completely immersed, which of course we often are. We're often just heads down, reading phones, et cetera, but that if you just force yourself to be in daily experiences and looking around you and just seeing, you can notice so many things. Whereas compare and contrast to if you work in an environment like the Valley, where every day you live in an unbelievably beautiful house that's protected in some way from the environment because the environment's basically desert, around you. And you get in a car and you drive to your beautiful campus like offices, and you never step into the tube. Do you know what I mean? I think that's a very problematic existence.
Yeah.
And I think if fundamentally what you're trying to do is understand audiences that you're building products for or you're trying to market products to, you can't exist in that kind of, bubble-like world.
If the CMOs are the guardians, pardon the pun, of audience understanding and the ones who are closest or are meant to be closest to the customer, what has prevented more of them from moving up into the CEO role? Surely you would think that the people who deeply understand the customers best are best positioned to lead the company forward. But that doesn't seem to be reflected in the numbers.
No, I wonder if it will become more reflected. I mean, particularly as CMOs become so much more data literate and quantitatively, adept, which I think the new generation, in a way, of CMOs really are going to be that. I think if you can combine that sort of confidence and capability with data, with genuine empathy around audience and insight, and a sort of a curiosity and an understanding and a channeling of who your audience is, with the learned leadership behaviours of being able to inspire but direct and manage and think about the fact that you are responsible for, and you are also the motivator in chief, in a way, for your kind of organization. I think there should be more. I think if you can deliver against those that sort of skill set.
The first time you applied for the CEO job and you didn't get it, what was the learning in terms of what skill you could have honed or demonstrated that prevented the decision-making body at that time from seeing you as someone who could have that role?
I mean, first of all, I think the learning took quite a long time to come. I think, it took me a long time to understand properly why I didn't get the job. And I think it was that real sense of I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so, I think I was quite naive. I think I thought that good work and achievements and the capability that those achievements potentially demonstrated would be enough. And I think that is wrong. You have to be willing to contextualize and explain and narrate what it is that you have achieved. You shouldn't just expect people to know or to understand or to have kind of given you the credit for it. You have to actively go out and explain and market what it is that you've done and why you are right for the job. So I think there's a sense of there is no shame in being able to merchandise yourself, in a sense. And I think I sort of came from a slightly sort of a sort of belief or a kind of faith that that good work would sort of speak for itself, and I don't think it does. I think you have to be willing to present it and to kind of place it on the table and to take the credit for it. And I also think you have to be able to genuinely articulate what it is that what your skill set is and what it is that you have to offer. I went through a process having not got the job and then left The Guardian. I remember going through a slightly agonizing process of writing my CV, but writing that sort of what I would always consider to be the kind of terrible, cringy paragraph at the top, which is slightly trying to sort of explain who you are.
Yes.
And
with a lot of superlatives.
It's sort of everything that you particularly as a Brit that you kind of think is sort of agonizing and ghastly. And the process is hard. It's hard writing. It's hard talking about yourself. It's hard writing about yourself. It's hard trying to, in a way, it seems so boastful and arrogant and easy to kind of reject that I don't need to do that. It's beneath me in a sense. It's sort of slightly kind of ghastly to be seen to try too hard. But the process of doing it is a powerful one because it takes you quite a long time. You actually, it's uncomfortable. But over time, maybe you write a sentence a day or you over time, you do get to something which is, it's no longer a list of the things that you have done. And it is now an articulation of what are the things that I have to offer as a leader, as a professional, as an individual. And in the process of doing that, you realize that this is important. It's not good enough to show up and say, well, I've had these jobs and maybe I did these things in these jobs. You actually have to bring that into something that's more powerful. And as a result of that, these are the things that I think I am really good at and strong at. This is the value that I can bring to this role and this organization.
I remember my very first manager at Google said, I want you to do 10% less. And I want you to invest that 10% into making sure everyone is aware of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I never forgot that feedback.
No.
Because this was one of those things that, I could outproduce anyone in terms of raw horsepower and output, but I wasn't growing as fast as other people. And her pinpointing at that time was, it's not about what you do. It's about how everyone else is aware of what you do.
Yeah.
So
amazing feedback.
It was great feedback. It always stayed with me. It always stayed with my very first manager, Cherie. People hear that, and I think it's a really hard for many people, myself included, think about what is that first step I take to get better at doing this? So what are some small things you could do to start to flex that muscle?
So I think the first step is coming to terms with the fact that it's not shameful or appalling, or indeed that it doesn't have to be overused word, but inauthentic to who you are. Because I think we often looked at some people, whether or not they were our peers or they were ahead of us, who were very good at marketing themselves, and we didn't like it.
That's right.
And
because we didn't think they were very good at the job.
Totally. And we thought it was inauthentic, and we thought they were people who were all about being pushy, and they were better at sort of marketing themselves than they were actually delivering what the role is. And I think some cultures really reward that, and that then becomes very difficult because you either have to play that game or you kind of slightly opt out, and there is a dignity in opting out. At least there's a perceived dignity in opting out. So I think the first step in this is coming to terms with the idea that doing this in a way that is genuine to you is not in itself becoming that person. You can do it while still being really good at your job and still being spending 90% of your time on the things that really matter. It is not a betrayal of who you are to accept that it's a necessary part of the process, and that you don't have to become a different person by doing it. You can do it in a way that's right for you. There is a I think the second piece is accepting that it is not it's not arrogant to think about a personal brand in a way. In a way, it's almost arrogant to think that you don't need to do that, because in a sense it's failing to recognize that you have an impact on others and that others' opinion of you matters. To believe that you can just, be brilliant at your job and that will be sufficient is sort of arrogant as well. It's an act of arrogance. Whereas actually thinking about the way that I show up, the way that I choose to kind of show up is about respect for others, and it's about being thoughtful about what it is that I'm trying to get done. And in a way, the management of your personal brand, which is partly about how do I show up and how do I have impact and how am I the most effective version of myself?
Yes.
That's the most important bit of the personal brand. The bit of actually then remembering that you need to tell people of the things that you've done. That's a minor piece. It's more important that you're thoughtful about the manner in which you're trying to get your job done, not just what it is that you're doing. And there's an interesting kind of little example of this where twice in my career, once when I was much younger and once actually when I was much older, I had feedback from a older woman, a sort of, kind of senior woman to me about what I wore. And when I was young, it was, I was like 24 or something. And I was literally showing up to work in, my boyfriend's shirts that I'd sort of, kind of borrowed and I remember being taken aside by the first properly sort of experienced, kind of thoughtful, older female boss that I'd had. And it wasn't just me, actually. She did it that we were a team of 3 women or something. And she said, you need to really think about what it is that you wear to work. And it's not that I'm trying to tell you, that you have to have a uniform, but you have to be thoughtful about the impression that it is that you want to make.
The message you're sending.
And do you want to be taken seriously? And if you want to be taken seriously, then you should think about what it is that you're wearing. And, the subtext, stop showing up in your boyfriend's creased shirt that you've kind of, worn from the night before. And I really remember that. And I thought about it. And anyway, flash forward 25 years or something, and I had a very similar conversation at a very different part of my career. And I remember, and she said it to me, and she said, I actually like the way you dress, but you are not thinking about the impression that you're making on people when you walk into a room. And you can decide that you want to make a particular impression, which is, you showing up not wearing a jacket or wearing trainers at a board meeting or whatever it is, but make sure that you're being intentional about it, because whether or not you like it or not, you are making an impression, and you should be thoughtful about whether or not that impression is the one that is going to work for you and is going to, sort of help you have the impact that you want to have. And I was originally very offended by this, and sort of I found it, to your point about what feedback do you take and what do you cast aside.
Well, especially because, I've seen you a lot over the years. You're an impeccable dresser.
No, so I initially kind of rejected it and was, as I say, quite offended. But then it really sat with me, and I thought about it, and I thought, actually, it's so correct, which is I had got into a slight sort of kind of mental state where I was having to go into so many meetings at the time, or do presentations, or being kind of, called into various things to sort of present on different topics. And I'd slightly got that sort of, and you just sort of, you'd show up and you looked really casual, and you didn't look like you cared, and you didn't look like you were taking it seriously. And I just sort of thought there is some truth in that, which is if you want to be taken seriously, as in if you want to change the way that they think about you because you are going for a different job, or you're trying to step up, or you're trying to make that kind of transition, why don't you reflect that in the way that you dress? And I care about clothes. Clothes are something that I really enjoy, and it's about identity. And so why is it so uncomfortable to say your identity in certain moments is the person that you want to project at that point? You can decide whatever it is that is. You can be unbelievably casual because that's the image that you want to project at that moment. But just be thoughtful about it, because to pretend that it's not having an impact on others is the bit that you're being foolish about.
How did you change the way you dress?
I was thoughtful about things like, this is before lockdown, so I think it's different now. But I was thoughtful about things like shoes, heels. I I was thoughtful about things like jackets. And I was thoughtful about that very, which is, what is it that you're trying to, do you want them to know that you think you're serious about this?
Speaking of the topic of this sort of personal brand and storytelling, when you think about what skill has played a disproportionate role in your success, what do you think is your superpower?
I think I am genuinely very interested in people. And so that is not, it's not a learned behavior. I'm really, really curious about people in all of their different forms and guises. And I think that allows me to have genuine professional empathy. And I think that has served me very well.
How have you maintained that as your remit has grown and the number of people that you are, in one sense or another, responsible for has gone from, a team you could probably wrap your hands around to hundreds, if not thousands of people who you, at least from a distance view, cannot have that level of a personal relationship with?
If you genuinely believe in and rate that sense of self-knowledge and reflection and the kind of importance of hearing from others, and you can maintain a sense of humility humility is but a sense that actually life is about continuing to learn and continuing to try and be better and continuing to be ready to put in the work to get better, which is about kind of hearing from people and being ready to receive that feedback. I think that keeps you very grounded, and it also keeps things really interesting. I think if you can combine curiosity with a kind of restlessness about what is it that kind of gives you energy, and it is about learning new things or getting better at particular, or overcoming fears. There's that real sense of you put yourself in situations that are uncomfortable and you survive, and maybe you did quite well, or maybe you could do better next time. That's the sort of, I think that's where you get kind of fulfillment and joy.
Yes, my brain, inside my brain, is very visual, and I always, whenever I meet a new person, what my brain always pictures is like sort of an opening to a whole new galaxy, bizarrely, because there's a whole new universe, and that person's view will never be the same as yours. But if you're actually curious, you can see the world from a completely different perspective.
And every time you actually have one of those encounters or conversations, or every time you make yourself go to something that perhaps you didn't want to go to, but there's one thing that gets said in at the event or at whatever it is that or in the conversation that you're having, that genuinely takes your brain into a different way or opens up, your kind of your mind about something. That's amazing. That keeps life interesting.
In the spirit of helping foster that in others, my last question for you is, and I'm a big reader, so what are some books that you have read that you think have most shaped or influenced how you show up at work?
I'm not totally convinced that I can give you books. I think I am more influenced by people that I follow and read regularly on Substack. I think that I'm sure there are some books, although I still believe that most of the books you can probably get the most value out of it by just reading the kind of the introduction.
Yeah, chapter 1 and 2.
Yes, which I presume in a world of AI is now going to be, the reality that you can get brilliant summaries. I think it's more about finding writers and thinkers that it sort of inspire you, and they just on a little level sort of trigger different things that make you kind of reflect on what it is that you're doing or what's possible. I do think, though, that one of the most profound experiences for me was going to this 4-week course at INSEAD, which was called the Advanced Management Program. And it really was an extraordinary it was an extraordinary experience, which I went into being quite not cynical, but I didn't go into it with a sort of huge amount of sort of enthusiasm. And it was the most profound kind of exercise or period of self-discovery, growing sort of understanding about what my motivations were and what kind of, what inspired me and what I was seeking and what were the sort of inhibitors to my kind of, performance, but also the power of those kind of processes and the introduction to a cohort of people who were, more or less my age, but from all over the world in totally different industries, all kind of completely different types, but all grappling with their own sort of, leadership, awareness and execution and sort of learning. And that was the most kind of affecting and eye-opening and has stayed with me kind of, and informs a lot of how I think and learn and think about particularly leadership and sort of management.
Well, perhaps there's something in going back to it being lonely at the top. I think when we spend most of our time inside an organization, it can feel quite lonely. But actually, when you cast a much wider net and go out there, you realize there is a community of people who are oftentimes dealing with these very same things that might seem crazy when you look at it from one vantage point, but actually are quite normal in the grand scheme of things. And perhaps that starts from intentionally creating those moments where you go out there and you build these communities of people around, who are undergoing similar things.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And I think it's, again, somebody, a friend of mine said that his great skill, because of the nature of what he does, he's an investor, was spotting patterns and spotting patterns of people, but also in challenges that come up within companies and businesses. And I think that's sort of it's like sometimes you have to break out of your own experience, which is incredibly focused and inevitably narrow, and remember that actually so many of the things that you're experiencing will be commonly shared by others, and that it's the identification of where there are those commonalities where you can get strength from kind of, finding a peer group or kind of referencing and breaking out of your own sort of vertical perspective.
Well, thank you for sharing your reflections and being so open about the journey you've taken and what you've learned along the way. And you're one of the very few marketeers who has ascended to these ranks. I hope there will be more, and I hope this will inspire more people to continue to aim higher and challenge their own ambition and believe that they're capable of getting all the way to the top. So thank you.
Well, thank you.